would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. No updates today on the stats on real estate agents that reach out to me regarding my property. No one has contacted me since yesterday's show. At the rate it's been going, I would expect to get probably 2 more this week. But we'll see. Maybe it's one of those dwindling things. Other things to talk about today, though, some kind of interesting stuff. Got a few articles here, a little bit of a survey of what's going on with debt. Remember, we've been talking a lot about how debt is debt, right? We all tend to manage it in the same way. Aside from that, the only thing that makes it unique is how we prioritize it. And basically what we'll service first, right? The things that we'll pay first versus last tends to remain relatively the same for us personally, but the point I'm going to make today is where that debt comes from may not matter, and that should be a point of concern. We're also going to talk about the housing drought and some interesting data for a city that has shown up on several of our quote-unquote must-invest areas that may be a warning to some people, so we'll keep that in mind as well. For those of you who are new to the show, thank you for tuning in. I truly appreciate it. Given the amount of folks checking the show out, I'm clearly talking to some new people, so I want to thank everyone who's been listening and has shared the show with other folks. And again, I want to welcome all the new listeners. I want to encourage you to head on over to therebelbroker.com. From there, if you'd like to get in contact with me, you can click the contact link in the menu bar, and you'll be able to send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have. And while you're there, put yourself in the drawing to win a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, we've been doing this for a while. We've given away at least $250, $300. I can't remember where we're at. But we just did it for this month. We just did it for March. We're going to be doing it again for April. So if you go over to therebelbroker.com, click the big red button at the top of the page titled Take the Survey to Support the Show. You'll be given an opportunity to share your email address. Both times you're asked, please use the same email address, answer a few demographic questions, and once all that is completed, you will be entered into the drawing for that $50 Amazon gift card. And good luck to you, and congratulations to all the other listeners who've won so far. Now, some of you have mentioned, Robert, why don't you mention that you get a $50 gift card if you click that red button? Why don't you mention it in the button or mention it on the site? Well, because I want the impetus really to come from the show for you to go and do it. I want actual listeners of the show to go and check that out and provide that information. I don't want just someone or some bot that's casually moving along through websites to click that button and do its thing. I want to get real people. So that's why. And again, appreciate all of you taking the time out, because not only are you putting yourself in a drawing for that $50 gift card, you're helping out the show by identifying demographics about the listeners to the show. It makes it easier for me to pitch the show to advertisers. And as you know, one of my goals for the show is to have it be on a paying basis. And so sponsors are an unavoidable part of that. And I actually have no problem with that as long as I am using my due diligence to only give the platform, only give access to my audience to things that I think are good things. So that's my promise to you. I'm not just going to throw random junk at you. I'm going to have to actually be convinced that it's a good thing, and from there we'll move forward. So. What other house cleaning things? If you would like to join the Rebel Underground, now that's a group of folks who have decided they'd like to get access to exclusive content. There's already one piece of exclusive content that's a video on how to drill down and fine-tune the area that you're interested in investing in. So if you've got a really large metro area or a city, it's ways to look at it without actually having to physically go there to sort of figure out what areas you might be most interested in, and then direct your searches towards those areas. It's a great first step if you're considering investing in a place you can't get to very easily right off the bat. It's a great way for you to jump in and get a little bit more info and get a little bit more familiar with the layout of the marketplace. The next video that's going to come out for members of the Rebel Underground is going to be the next step after that. Once you've drilled down and you've found properties that you like, how do you analyze a specific property? So we'll be moving from analyzing the marketplace to analyzing a specific property, and that'll be posted. That's going to be the next project. I'm going to start working on that actually this weekend. So look for that probably sometime soon. But again, you have to be a member of the Rebel Underground to get access to that. Best way to get access to the Rebel Underground is to text the word Rebel Broker to the number 44222. That's text the word, all one word, Rebel Broker to the number 44222. You'll then get a reply so that you know you're communicating with the right thing. And from there, you should be great. You'll be on the list automatically. And thanks for those who've jumped in and joined the Rebel Underground. There have been quite a few of you. The other thing I guess I could mention is if the number of people who are trying to hack into your website is any indication of success, then I am about to become the king of whatever it is I do. Because over the last 2 months, the attempts to get control of, break into, log into as an admin, the website for the show has just gone through the roof. And I'm not sure if that's a thing. It'd be awesome if somehow there was a competition, because I can't help thinking I would place very high on that competition. And if there was a prize, I might win it, which would be nice. So I guess maybe once something reaches a certain amount of traffic, suddenly bots and hackers or whoever else is out there want to try and get control of it. But I decided instead of being worried about it, I would just do all of the security things I could do and take it as a compliment that somebody wants to break onto the Rebel Broker and conduct shenanigans. So if you're a listener, thanks, I guess, would be the thing to say. Okay, let's jump in. Is there anything else? God, I feel like there was something else I accomplished that would have been really great info for you in terms of an update. I suppose I could let you know that the final review of the kitchen upgrade is complete. It's going to be, so far I'm over budget by about $3,000. It became pretty clear. Then the reason why is because I upgraded the materials. I probably could have done this for within my budget, but again, it's the advice I've given you. I listened to my own advice. I decided that there are certain expectations once a home is priced in a certain price range. And this is a complaint that I have shared with buyers I've worked with in the past when they were shopping at a certain price point and we were seeing certain upgrades that just weren't at the level of that house. And nothing would annoy me more than saving, say, $5,000 in the work and then losing that amount in terms of the perception of the property, right? I'm going to be a pretty good chunk above the average price in my community, to the point where I need to understand that there are expectations at that price point. And understanding those expectations is important to doing work that meets those expectations, because all that's going to do is A, not reach the expectations folks are expecting for the amount of money that they're spending, and B, negatively affect potentially what I'm going to make. So I had to sort of bite the bullet and decide, you know what, if I were shopping for a house at this price point for a client, and I noted the things I would have noted about this kind of upgrade to a kitchen, then I would have let them know that it was not a luxury level or a this price range upgrade to the kitchen. And I've done it for clients before. Because sometimes it's not horribly obvious. So I did that. So it was really more of a decision that put me over budget rather than a thing I didn't anticipate, other than not anticipating that I would make a different call on what I was doing. But there also comes a time when you just have to do it, right? You don't want to delay these decisions so that you're constantly pushing out your date. My date is still stuck. I'm still going to be complete with the kitchen in that first couple of weeks of May, so that I'll be able to go on the market in the last couple of weeks of May. The only other complication is that there's a medical problem with my contractor who has to have surgery. So that is looking like it might be a delay. That wouldn't necessarily be a problem for you. In your world, you could simply say, well, fine, I'll find myself another contractor. In my world, he's a relative. So I want to try and cut them some slack. So that may end up being a delay. Okay. And you know what? Normally, 9 times out of 10, you would probably never even hear about it. If this person worked for a larger company, they just would have put someone else on your account while that person was recovering. So probably not a huge issue. But all in all, I still calculate that the changes I'm making are going to earn me more in sales price than I'm going to be spending on them by a pretty good chunk. In fact, I'm even toying with putting it on the market, even if the rest of the major changes, all the other minor stuff in the property will be done. Probably even before the kitchen's done. But the master bath, a little bit on the fence as to whether or not I need to wait for that to be completed. And it really depends on the timing. I don't want to wait more than the second week of June for my listing. There's a sweet spot in there that I've calculated for my area. Second week of June is I'm going to miss it. So I want to make sure and get in there before then in terms of getting folks to look at the property. So if I have to, I have to. Yeah, so same strategies hopefully that you're using. If you're doing either a flip, hopefully you're trying to work it out into a way that you get the biggest bang for the buck. Or if you're doing the same thing I am, you're trying to get your money out of your property so that you can move on to do other things. That is good too. Interesting to bring up. I did get an email from someone. I love that so many of you are engaged, I guess, by my project. And I had one person say, well, you know, Robert, if you're seeing what you're seeing, why would you want to sell now? Why do you feel the need to sell at the top? Because in one show I had mentioned that it's a relative thing, right? Because I had mentioned casually that the prices for homes I would be buying is also going up at the same time the price for my house is going up. But those two things are relative to one another, right? By and large, it's a wash. If property values go up by X amount of dollars per month, well, my house is in relatively the same market. So the percentage, if it's a percentage increase, then I'm actually benefiting more because I'm at a higher price point. If it's just really more of a flat rate, then it's a wash, right? So why do you care? Why do you care about timing it like that? I'll tell you why. Because in this equation, there is one number that is not variable. The sales price, the average sales price is going to move month to month. It's going to move over time, right? There's one number that doesn't, and that is how much I owe on the property. Now, I have a loan. I have a mortgage like most of you do. And in order for me to get the biggest bang for the buck, the key thing for me is to sell at the highest point so that then the amount that I am able to pull out of the transaction is the highest. That's a fixed number. I can't change that mortgage amount unless I actually give the bank money. So the amount that stands between what I currently owe on my mortgage and what I sell this home for needs to be as high as possible. So that's why I'm timing it that way. And for folks who haven't been listening to the show for a long time, one potential tactic that I was thinking about using was actually renting for a period of time. If I believe that prices are going to go down, if I am convinced of that, or I believe that I could absolutely get a far better deal that would represent a savings that is substantial enough to make sense to do this, I would actually consider renting a place, for instance, and then waiting for winter to come and then buying then if I think the prices are going to go down enough by then to warrant it. Not sure that's something I'm going to do given what I have going on with. If it was just me, it would be a lot easier call to make, but it's not. It's myself and my 3 boys. One of my boys will be off to college middle of this year, but I still have 2 more left. So the idea of making them move multiple times is probably not the coolest thing in the world to do. So that's kind of what's holding me back there. Okay. So that's the full-on update. You're almost everything. All right, let's jump in. So we've got an interesting article. A couple of them are from Zero Hedge. So we kind of have to realize that we're going to get the ultimate bad news take on a lot of things. So I guess we could finish with that. Just a little bit more info on this being the worst housing drought ever in terms of properties on the market. As I mentioned yesterday, the only part of the making homes part of the inventory problem that we can directly affect is the new home side. right? We can yell to the sellers, this is the time for you to sell. We can say, jump out there, get your home sold, but we can't force people to sell their existing homes, right? So that's not a number that we can fool with. We can fool with different elements that would motivate builders to build homes. And we can absolutely, I mean, if you're someone who I know we talk a lot about what the role of government and regulation should or should not be in a lot of these realms, but the reality is that if, regardless of which side of the equation you're on, whether you're someone who believes get government out of it, pull them away, get the regulations lower, get the costs lower, just get them out of it so that the market can simply work and that builders can meet the demand. If that's your philosophy and you believe that, great. If you are someone who believes that government is the solution to problems, not the source of problems, great. Because the bottom line is, regardless of those two opinions, some of the same actions are going to give us the results we need to get more houses. Whether that means rolling regulations back to, say, the year 2000, or if not, let's say you think, all those regulations were passed for a reason. They all definitely fall under the heading of valuable to society and community, all those other kinds of wonderful things. All right, well, then let's put a moratorium on certain taxes relating to building a property. Something that makes it far less expensive, because the reality is that whatever causes an expense to a builder is going to get transferred to a buyer. So let's push for that. I have yet to hear anybody talk about that. All we've had over the last month is a couple of casual mentions out of context without specificity about, yeah, it's an inventory problem, right? On the other side of that coin, you get tons of different solutions to create more buyers. The problem with the real estate market is there aren't enough buyers, I guess, according to some folks who don't know what they're talking about, because that's actually the source of a deeper and more complicated problem. In fact, that philosophy of let's create more buyers is what got us in trouble in the first place. Okay, so this is an article that comes to us from the National Association of Realtors, realtor.org. Number of homes for sale right now is the lowest on record. And we talked about this the other day. That's over the last 18 years. That's how long they've been keeping track of this stuff. The lack of new home supply is one culprit. Housing starts are only at about 75% of their historical average. Builders are focusing on pricier segments of move-up buyers. We discussed why that is. And so there's a big void in terms of lower-cost homes that appeal to first-time home buyers. Investors purchased about 4 million distressed properties, mostly in the lower-priced starter home segment during the housing crash. They've been holding on to these properties, continuing to rent them out rather than selling. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not sure why that's a complaint. Providing housing is a valuable thing. And here's a quote from Lawrence Yun. Investors came in to get that cash flow, and the cash flow remains very positive. The price appreciation is just extra gravy that they're witnessing, and they're saying they're going to ride out this price increase. Now, that's an interesting statement to make, and of course, the National Association of Realtors wants more homes to sell more often, right? A successful real estate market where more homes are selling draws in more real estate agents, and more real estate agents equals more dues. So there's definitely a horse in the race in this argument, but what I think is an interesting thing to bat around in your head is, who were these investors that invested in this real estate back in the day when that was what was happening? Now, there are folks who that's what they do. There's a percentage of folks who simply found an opportunity to do what they've always been doing and invest in real estate. But that wasn't a dominant thing. When we were talking about all of those homes that were being auctioned by the government-sponsored entities, by FHA, Fannie, Freddie, all those guys, all those homes were holding all of these foreclosed properties. They've had put rules into effect that made it virtually impossible for individuals to buy those. They were selling them in huge groups where folks had to come up with millions and millions of dollars to buy these things. At the time, I had a huge problem with that. I figured that they would simply do tons better to solve this problem by creating a temporary government eBay, or even just using eBay and auctioning off each individual property and letting folks buy them. let mom and pops buy 1, 2, 3 properties instead of bundling them into these gigantic groups that only giant corporations could get involved in or giant investment trusts could get involved in. So what did that create? It created some pretty monolithic organizations that bought lots and lots of real estate. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what you discover when you see this is these were not real estate people. A lot of these organizations brought some real estate folks in, but the whole point was this is a place where we can see our money working for us. So it was less, we do real estate, this is what we do, so naturally we're doing this. It was, we are in things to make money. We invest in oil when it makes sense. We invest in sugar futures when it makes sense. We invest in whatever when it makes sense. Right now, today, real estate's at this epic low point, so we're going to go ahead and invest at that. So my argument was that at some point, the math is going to make sense for these folks to liquidate these properties because they're going to simply see we've seen prices go up enough and we can pull out the profit. And in some cases that's happened where we've started to see we had actually a big run of that stuff about 18 months to 2 years ago, where an awful lot of properties went on the market that had been foreclosed properties but had been rented for a period of time. But I think there's another big wave of that stuff potentially to come. But I think one problem is that since rental rates have not declined, there haven't been any times when rental rates in any of these big areas have started to go down. So I think what they're looking for in this math is a point where the rents stabilize or flatten or even go down a little bit, and we've seen a relative peak of home value. At that point, I think you see these guys liquidating. I think you see them say, okay, we have really milked this cow for every ounce we can, and the computer now has been doing the math and shows us this is the right time. That we had a projected growth in rent over the last year of 1.2%. We only got 0.8%, whatever the number happens to be. And the computer alerted us that we've also not seen the level of increase in value of the property that we expected. So maybe now's the time to go. We haven't started things declining, but we have seen a reduction in the level of increases per quarter. So this is the math, right? This is what and a lot of times this isn't even a human being running these numbers. This is an automated computer script. The humans will pop in the value numbers and the real market numbers. And then this thing just advises what to do. And I'm sure there's human decision-making involved in there at some point. But that's the math, right? And that makes sense. And that's not a big stretch. These are the kinds of numbers that they're figuring out. So when you start to see a pivot in any of those numbers, I think that's when these numbers kick in for some of these holders of these investment properties to liquidate them. The question is, when does that happen? Now, in New York, it sure does seem like that's a high probability, right? I'm not sure how much of this happened in New York in terms of lots of foreclosed properties getting bought by these larger investment firms. But given the pivot that we've seen there, that might be an area where folks might start thinking that that's something that would be worthwhile to do. It wouldn't surprise me if those numbers got kicked around in Miami a little bit. But it'll be interesting to see when that starts to happen here in California. I've been watching the market here. I don't think those numbers have gotten anywhere near where that's a realistic expectation. Rents are still good. They're continuing to grow. They've flattened a little bit, but still the rate of growth is respectable. And home prices are still going up. So either way, these folks are making money, whether it's real money that they get each and every month, or if it's unrealized gains in terms of a value of a property increasing. So I think we need to look for that. We need to look for that pivot point, keep an eye on it, particularly in our own local economies, depending on what you're interested in. If you're a landlord who owns rental properties, those are clearly things you're going to want to be thinking about as well. Okay, folks, we're going to take a really quick break here, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com, and and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. Well, we just spent a little bit of time discussing what was going on with my personal rehab on my house in preparation for selling it in the next couple of months. Spent a little bit of time talking about the worst housing drought that we've ever seen, according to the numbers released by the National Association of Realtors. Of course, that's only 18 years worth of data. That's how long they've been keeping track of these kinds of things. So keep that in mind. But it's important data to know. And we discussed a little bit about when we might start to see the pivot point as it relates to changing a whole lot of single-family residential homes that were bought by really big corporations in the downturn out of foreclosure turned into rentals, and when some of those might turn back into single-family residential homes on the market. Really just throwing around theories, though, but also offered a few things to keep your eye on so that you could kind of spot when that pivot point is coming in your marketplace, because who knows, that may actually end up representing a really good opportunity for a lot of folks out there to jump in and get some real estate. Okay, next. An interesting observation relating to a city that has shown up on at least two of the lists we've covered on this show in terms of desirable places to invest. You know, two of the big surprises, the continuing surprises for me, are cities like Detroit and Chicago. And that could absolutely simply be my ignorance of those. And it is, right? If people are clearly making a good return on investments in properties in those cities, those folks know the right place to invest. They know they have the ground truth and know what communities to invest in. Great. More power to you. For me, who's someone who just really reads the headlines about, and some of the creepy stories that come out of those two locations, they're just not on the top of my list. There's so many other things to worry about that I tend to avoid them, right? But also remember, in chaos, there is profit. Sun Tzu knew it. A lot of great investors have known it. So if you know the ins and outs, it can absolutely work for you. So, you know, don't let me poo-poo the idea of you jumping in, because you know what's going to save a lot of these communities is going to be people who go in and invest in the Chicagos and the Detroits and help to turn those places around and make them robust communities again. So don't get me wrong. But what I find interesting, and something, if you are moved to do this, if you are someone who would like to jump in and be part of the recovery, I mean, look at places like New Orleans after the hurricane. I mean, that's a great example of folks coming out and really breathing life back into a community. But anyway, more people are ditching Chicago in record numbers as it leads the U.S. in population loss. So just like everything else we've talked about that are magnets that bring bodies into a city as being things you want to be aware of that can indicate to you where your next investment should be, where you should be thinking about buying a house for a rehab or buying a house for a rental. If you're seeing population growth in these areas, that is great for you. That equals more demand for places to live. You know, if your population is growing, that means that whatever's going on with the properties there's a higher level of demand for them, right? It's not even a complicated, it's a common sense conclusion, right? But domestic migration in Cook County, and this is July 1st, 2015 to July 1st, 2016. And it's kind of mind-boggling. It's negative 66,244. And if I'm looking at these numbers right, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, it looks like it beats out the following 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 counties combined. So it's not first by a little. It's first by a huge amount. And that should be a concern. If you're going to want to look at where that's, I mean, Cook County is Chicago. So you absolutely want to look at that and try to figure out how that's going to affect your investments in Chicago, depending on where they are. Now, I would guess that with that much migration just out, that there's probably a lot of internal migration, people moving out of some areas and into others. So what you might find is micro migrations that work for you. So again, it's about that ground truth and knowing where in Cook County you want to do stuff. A couple of the other ones here that I'll just share with you. I'm not going to get into a huge amount of detail just because they're dwarfed by Cook County. Wayne County, Michigan is next on the list. And let's, if you want to go up to Google and you want to type in Wayne County, Michigan, guess where Wayne County, Michigan is? Guess what city is in Wayne County, Michigan? Detroit. They have a net loss in terms of domestic migration of 17,346. But again, that is a great number compared to what the folks in Cook County are seeing. So the population in Cook County is 5,203,000. The population in Wayne County is 1,749,000. But they're both experiencing a 0.4% reduction. What's interesting is, so they're equal in terms of percentage of population that's leaving, and maybe that's a fairer number to judge by. And so it's not even a percent, because Baltimore City, Maryland has got a 1.1% drop in population. Jefferson County, New York has a 2.8% drop in population. San Juan County, New Mexico has a 3.1% drop. So in terms of percentage, I mean, I guess if you want to look at the total number, that's still a staggering number, but there's nearly five times the number of people in Cook County than in Wayne County. So if you multiply 17,000 by 5, well, that's more than 66,000, right? So maybe it's fairer to look at it by percentage. I personally think it is, which would mean that they're both should be lower on the list. There are plenty of other communities that have bigger percentage decreases. But no matter how you slice it, that they're in terms of the number of properties that are likely to be impacted, right? That still is a large number. When you have an exodus of 66,244 people, that's a pretty substantial number of people, and that is folks who are no longer renting. Those are folks who are no longer paying a mortgage on their house and maybe had to sell it for really low. I'd be interested to see what the listings are in Cook County, just to see what's up with that. I would imagine a lot of that migration was probably from renters, which could be very bad for folks who are renting in those areas. So keep that in mind. Just something to keep in mind, numbers that you're going to want to look at. And again, if you want to see these numbers for yourself, head on over to therebelbroker.com. Check out the show notes. I'm also changing the show notes format as of today. I used to start off with a narrative. What I'm going to do is kind of have a really basic narrative, just a quick intro sentence, and then have bullet points on the various topics that we discussed, geared mostly to make it much easier for you to be able to find shows by doing a search. I'm finding a lot of folks are asking, how do I find this show? How do I find that show? And that's fine. Typically, if you do a search on the thing you're interested in, you're going to get a list of all the shows that fit the bill. I also, because of the format the site used to be in, I used to use the site also as a portal for news items from other outlets, very similar to what I do now with my Twitter feed. I deleted all that stuff. So all of those are now gone. So when you do a search, it's 99% of it is going to be focused just on shows. So you're not going to get all that other stuff that was related to news items that was getting posted to the site back. I think I stopped doing that portal thing about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So you won't get those anymore. It'll just be focusing mostly on the show. So if you've used the search feature at the site before and were frustrated by it because of the results you were getting, you can head back over there and more easily find things now. So hopefully this new way of doing the show notes will also make it a lot easier for the right things to come up when you do a search. Okay. This is, it'll take us a little bit long if we do this subject. Maybe we can just cover it real quick. So again, another article from the good folks over at Zero Hedge, the title, "This New Bubble is Even Bigger Than the Subprime Fiasco." We've talked about this before. They give you an interesting history of subprime investing. things that we haven't talked about here on this show. But the same truths that we've talked about. Subprime really got its shot in the arm after 1995 because of a legal ruling against a bank where subprime lending now had to happen more. But what's interesting is that a bank created the very first subprime mortgage bond way back in 1988. So that's kind of interesting. It's the same year I got my real estate license. But it really didn't get going until the late 1990s, really in 1995, when banks suddenly realized they were going to be forced to underwrite subprime loans in order for them to be able to continue to operate really as a bank based on regulations. A couple of interesting numbers in here that I thought were worth knowing, worth having in your head, whether it's because someone says something goofy on the Starbucks line or you're in a chat with someone. In 2007, the total value of subprime loans hit a whopping $1.3 trillion. Now remember that number. Over the last decade or so, there's been an absolute explosion in student loans. Right now, remember, $1.3 trillion in subprime loans. Now we saw that in the last from 2004. 2004 we had $260 billion in student loans. Today, last year, so the number's bigger now than it was last year, but last year's number, $1.31 trillion. So the total value of student loans in America today is larger than the total value of subprime loans at the peak of the financial bubble. So remember, this all ties in with what we've been talking about now for weeks. Think of it less about where the debt is and just the fact that there is this debt that is burdening you. And think about the frivolity with which people assumed this debt during the subprime lending. People were willing to just do stated income. Yeah, sure, I make that amount of money. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, no worries, whatever. 110% loan? Sure. That's a great idea. So people were absolutely in a crazy place with how they regarded the debt they were taking on with their homes. Well, let's compare that to numbers we've talked about here on this show relating to student debt. Now, remember, we talked about a story a month ago where over the last 10 years, it had been incorrectly reported by the Department of Education in terms of how much of student loans were being paid back. And when that was corrected, we discovered that nearly 50%, 48 or 49% of students who've graduated in the last 10 years have not made a single payment on their student loan. Not a dollar. Right? And remember, with a student loan, you get 1 year of amnesty where you graduate from college and then you're not expected to start making payments on your student loan to a year later. And nearly half of those people have not made a single payment. Now take into consideration the latest poll that was done by students and recent graduates, current college grad students and current and recent graduates. 50% of those folks believe that they'll never have to pay back their student loan. They believe that loan will simply be forgiven. Whether that is true or not is immaterial. That debt exists. It is out there, and it is toxic. And that could easily be something that pushes a marketplace into a very bad place. What's nuts is, as you would guess, many student loans are in default. According to the Fed's most recent household debt and credit report, the student loan default rate is 11.2%, almost the same as the peak mortgage default rate in 2010. This is also interesting because the reason why I call this toxic is because student loans have no collateral, right? You can't repossess 4 years of college. You can't repossess what someone learned about basket weaving or whatever they majored in, right? It's not like they're going to have to give up anything in order to make that loan right. At least with the subprime loan, there was a piece of property that you could take and potentially recover value based on the value of that. That's what's made the subprime debacle, according to this article, so dangerous. Quote, millions of homes were underwater, so when borrowers didn't pay, lenders didn't have sufficient collateral to cover their loan exposure. With students, there is no collateral. Lenders have no security to recoup their loans. So when students don't pay, someone is going to take a hit. That someone will likely be you and I. That's because hundreds of billions of dollars of these student loans are either owned or guaranteed by the United States government. So as borrowers stop making payments, it's the taxpayer who will suffer yet another massive loss. It goes on to say some other scary stuff. Federal Reserve data once again showed that for at least 25% of college graduates, salaries are no higher than for people with just a high school diploma. So looking at some other things that really don't matter. The point is, we want to understand debt because that has a profound influence on what people do. And if these folks find out they're going to actually have to pay this money, and my guess is at some level they will. I don't know if they'll end up being forgiven for part of it or what. But assuming they're going to be burdened with this, that means that this is a potential debt problem that could be catastrophic. And in terms of a collapse, this is even worse because at least we had real estate last time that could over the long term potentially offer us at least some level of relief. We could be really out of money now and not have money now for a while. But by being able to pull back and foreclose on a property, there was the hope of recouping. We've got now amounts exceeding the total amount lost from the downturn of the subprime problem with real estate with a thing that has no value. It has no dollar value other than the faith and credit of the borrower, which are these students who seem convinced, the majority seem convinced they don't have to pay it, and to the tune of over 11% aren't in terms of general default, but half of them have not, from some reports, according to the Department of Education, nearly half have not made a payment on their loan. I'm not sure how that statistic works out. There must be some segment that are absolutely paying it back because to bring it down to 11% from 40-something% is interesting. I'm interested to see how that math works. But when half of these folks believe they won't be asked to pay it back, they feel for some reason they shouldn't be asked to pay it back, I think that creates a pretty scary debt scenario and could absolutely be something that ends up being an external occurrence that pushes real estate back into another horrible situation. Because a lot of these folks clearly are deciding in their debt formation that paying back their student loan is a low priority. All right, folks, not the best of news to jump into on a Tuesday, but, it is what it is. Hopefully it's valuable to you and will help inform you to make better decisions or be more cautious in your own dealings, or at least create a plan B where if something like this really does end up laying a huge egg and screwing over the marketplace, you've got yourself in a position where you're ready to weather the storm. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to y'all next time.